Great job hunting this cochon, mon pote. You've sure gotten good at shooting things. Mech, we're on a tropical island with no women before the proliferation of sunscreen or sandcastle building competitions. There's nothing else to do. Attendez, you idiot. There's a ship coming. Hold up the sign. Oye, look at their oguarita estúpida. Nice fire, Pioneers. Bestemel et casse-toi. Es un boucan, p*** de vas espagnol. Este gilipollas Wencestercoles pedazo de da un bucán. Hasta nunca, Buccaneers. We're going to start robbing those guys, right? Oui.
In the 17th century, piracy is a booming business across the globe. You got the Corsairs in the Mediterranean, Cheng Shi and the Red Fleet in the South China Sea, and Malabar pirates in the Indian Ocean. But none have captured the imagination of Hollywood and American pop culture quite like the Buccaneers of the West Indies, or dare I say, the Pirates of the Caribbean. Swashbuckling, rum-loving, charismatic adventurers in search of fame and fortune like Jack Sparrow tend to be what come to mind when most people, especially in the US, think of Caribbean buccaneers. Now, I'm going to assume you've seen the Sam O'Nella video and know that the life of your average pirate is nowhere near as romanticized as the movies make them appear. It's no shocker that most pirates were illiterate, so how do we know anything about these guys to either inspire our Hollywood stories about them or correct common misconceptions we may have about these maritime marauders? Alexander Exquemelin was a Frenchman who moved to the Caribbean in the mid-17th century. After being dissatisfied with the day-to-day on the island and hearing tales of people running away to join pirate parties, he does the same. But what made Exquemelin so noteworthy was, well, that he took notes. He actually worked as a pirate surgeon for multiple pirate crews, including the infamous Henry Morgan of Shitty Frat Party Rum fame. He went on many voyages, expeditions, and violent campaigns with various captains and ships across the Caribbean, especially around the island of Hispaniola, which is modern-day Haiti and Dominican Republic, and up the Central American coast. When Exquemelin retired from buccaneering, a feat not many can claim, he settled down in the Netherlands and published one of the most influential pieces of pirate historiography of all time that would go on to influence the way pirates are presented across a plethora of media, from alcohol branding to Disney making Johnny Depp fight Billy Mack from Love Actually. I digress. The book is called Buccaneers of the Americas. One of the points Exquemelin covers is what led to the Buccaneers as a phenomenon. Before the 17th century, there was an influx of French Protestant settlers known as Huguenots to the region of the Caribbean, unoccupied by the Spanish. Their motivations were similar to those of the Pilgrims of Jamestown and Plymouth, but where the Pilgrims settled down and lied about being totally chill with the natives and made a holiday about it, many of the Huguenots found themselves fending for survival on Caribbean islands like Tortuga. They mostly made their livings hunting bulls and boars that the Spanish had populated the island with before the French settlers temporarily fought them off. Many of these religious migrants turned boar hunters became quite successful smoking the pork and beef from their hunts over fire pits known as boucans and selling that meat to the island's inhabitants and ships that passed by. There are two sorts of hunters, those who hunt bulls and those who go after wild boar to sell meat to the planters. The hunters of bulls became known as buccaneers. But what would make these barbecuing bucaneros turn from the art of cooking to the art of war and terror? The answer to that question is complicated. There's many reasons, but three tie together pretty well and give a good overview. Number one, these guys were running out of animals to hunt. Sure, there's a whole sea's worth of people on ships to feed, but if you don't have the supply of wild animals to meet the demand, eventually you'll have a lot of unemployed marksmen. Number two, lack of opportunities for any non-Catholics in the dominantly Spanish Caribbean left a lot of these unemployed marksmen unable to find suitable replacement work. And number three, the Spanish began taking more control of islands in the Caribbean, pushing buccaneers to find new places to call home. If you were a Frenchman in Spanish territory, the Spanish authorities wanted to know where you lived, slept, and ate. It wasn't uncommon for these people to just join pirate crews because there was nowhere else to go. According to Exquemelin, the first Buccaneer was a man named Pierre Le Grand of Deep, who commandeered a Spanish Grand Admiral's fleet in 1602, although I doubt the first successful buccaneering adventure ever resulted in the capture of an entire fleet. These buccaneers weren't the first to engage in piracy in the Caribbean, but after hearing about or even witnessing the successes of privateering crews who were pirates armed and commissioned by the colonial powers to plunder the ships of other competing powers, and thought that that was a pretty appealing business model, especially if you could cut out paying the middleman and keep all the booty for you and your crew. Eventually, the term buccaneer became synonymous with any pirate in the region who attacked ships without the permission of any colonial power. Many privateers themselves would eventually turn to illegal buccaneering. Quite frankly, life for most buccaneers would have sucked. In between the plunder and adventure was the grueling reality of life at sea. The food sucked, the people were constantly getting sick and spreading that crap around, the smell was probably unbearable. Gruesome bloodshed and murder were a pretty normal sight, which I don't think is healthy for normal human development. And the likelihood of being the next grape shot painted all red Jackson Pollock painting on the ship deck increased with every passing battle. But not all was terrible about being a pirate. Many crews abided by a common code that didn't quite guarantee rights to members of pirate crews, but more or less acted as a credit score for captains that would go down if they didn't abide by the rules regarding things like sharing plunder and provisions. But instead of not being able to buy a home if you get too low, your crew would mutiny and you would most likely die an excruciating death at their hands. Or maybe if you're lucky, they'd just leave your ass on an island in the middle of nowhere with no chance of escape or survival. What was I saying about things not always being that bad? Oh, right, pirate code. This code encouraged captains to distribute plunder made by committing acts of international terrorism against ships and ports equally among crewmates, and still giving a larger share to the captain, of course. Today, we tend to think of pirates as nothing but bloodthirsty savages plundering for gold, or bumbling, rum-loving adventurers like Jack Sparrow. But while there's certainly some credence to both of those interpretations, the reality is much more diverse and complicated. Pirates came from all kinds of countries and backgrounds, both formerly enslaved and formerly gentry. What may come as a surprise to a lot of us is that many buccaneers were just as brilliant tacticians as they were ruthless criminals. Much like fans of Warhammer 40k, many pirate crews were deceptively adept at understanding military logistics and strategy.
Yar, me boom crasher orc boys, cast a jump and appear behind your Necron warriors. Rah! Your move. Avast, ye rapscallion! Me wizard robots are supported by a Triarch Stalker, capable of completely eviscerating ye squad of jumping soldiers. Not me orc boys! No!
Henry Morgan, for example, wasn't content on just plundering ships. This Welsh megachad put together a pirate land invasion force complete with cavalry, reserve troops, and a fleet of modified warships and treasure vessels, and he used this force to capture multiple fortresses outside of Panama City, Panama, not Florida, which he used as a staging ground to besiege the city with a population of tens of thousands. Despite the Spanish forces stationed in the city putting up heavy resistance and employing what I would call a Spanish superweapon, but you might call a literal stampede of 2,000 bulls, Morgan's Buccaneers were able to rout the Spanish cavalry forces and sack the city with naval support from the rest of Morgan's fleet. Pirates aren't particularly known for their strategic prowess outside of using fear tactics, but Captain Morgan proved that many Buccaneers were indeed capable of grand military strategy, as long as there was enough coins and silverware to plunder after. For real, pirates love silverware. Why rich people insisted on making cutlery super valuable and easy to fit in mine or a pirate's pocket is beyond me. But don't get me wrong, they were still ruthlessly violent. After they gutted like 600 Spanish soldiers taking Panama City, they burnt down the entire settlement and took all the loot back to Tortuga. It might be slightly anachronistic to consider buccaneers like Henry Morgan to be international terrorists, but small bands of armed men, many of whom were armed by countries as a means of indirectly weakening competing nations, using violence to become major threats to peace in the regions they operated in, and to the powers that armed them in the first place, it just all kind of sounds familiar. Eventually, colonial powers decided that paying armed thugs to harass each other's shipping lanes was only encouraging people like Buccaneers to take advantage of the chaos, and European navies hunted down any rogue pirate crews throughout the 17th and early 18th centuries, one of the last being Edward Teach, a man better known as Blackbeard. Until all that remained of Caribbean piracy were the legends, mythologies, and stories of adventure they left behind. And thanks to writings of real buccaneers like Exquemelin, we have an easier time separating that myth from reality. By the 1740s, pirate attacks become exceedingly rare, with economic warfare becoming more about sanctions and less about blowing dudes up with cannons and colonies across the ocean. There was little room for pirate crews that now either had to be strong enough to fight against fleets of British, French, and Spanish ships, or give up peacefully while they could still be granted amnesty for turning themselves in. Of course, piracy never entirely vanished from the Caribbean. This Guyanese news article from 2 years ago about pirates being handed 35-year jail sentences in Suriname proves that your opportunity to live your childhood fantasy of setting sail for some ill-gotten gold and glory under the Jolly Roger might still not be impossible after all. I'm Bart Bartley, and thank you for watching. Now go do some piracy! You can start to bread, baby. You just gotta start selling some pork, and then you can become the pirate king. Find the One Piece!